73rd World Health Assembly continues to session through Thursday, with world leaders convening virtually for the first time due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Hundreds of people took to the streets of Santiago de Chile in the midst of the government-imposed lockdown to denounce the lack of food in the capital city. Morocco has extended its state of emergency and coronavirus lockdown to June 10th. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. The 73rd World Health Assembly began on Monday and will session through Tuesday, with global leaders convening virtually for the first time due to the novel coronavirus pandemic. Speaking during the event, the Director General of the World Health Organization defended the agency's response to the global health crisis.
I'm calling on all nations to resolve that they will do everything it takes to ensure that the 2020 coronavirus pandemic is never repeated. I'm calling on all nations to invest in strengthening and implementing the many tools at our disposal, especially the global treaty that underpins global health security, the international health regulations. To be successful, we must all commit to mutual ownership and accountability.
And in this context, Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, offered statements on the situation in her country and the Caribbean region.
Our CARICOM heads of government adopted a whole-of-government and a whole-of-society approach. In addition, we reached to our Caribbean neighbour Cuba and received hundreds of doctors and nurses to help us. I take this opportunity to thank our brothers and sisters in Cuba and the government of the Republic of Cuba in particular for its unswerving assistance during this pandemic. It has been palpable and clear to all of our population. So, our CARICOM family banded together to lock down and ride out this first wave. And it has been a long and treacherous wave. The closing of our borders and the trebling of unemployment and the reduction of our government revenues by half have created grave challenges for many of us. Similarly, the psyche of people in our hemisphere has been disturbed. For the majority of persons under the age of 70 in the Caribbean, many of whom have never had to confront grave challenges, the world appears to be on autopilot. They wonder who is in control and where is the leadership? Where is the global cooperation that they so expected? And for too many of our citizens globally, life has become a game of roulette, betting on numbers and colors and ignoring the science that needs to underpin our actions.
In his speech to the 73rd World Health Assembly, Argentinian Health Minister Ginés González García said that preserving life should be the priority of all governments in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. As our President Alberto Fernandez has said, no one will be saved alone. We are aware of the socio-economic damage that we're going through at a global level, and that is why we must continue to work under an integrated approach, implementing measures that allow us to mitigate the negative effects on the community by putting the protection of people's lives first.
And in his address to the Assembly, Mexico's Secretary of Health, Jorge Alcocer, noted the importance of coordinated and comprehensive international efforts to combat the coronavirus pandemic and other health threats around the world.
We are convinced that in this complex moment, we have the opportunity to further guide and coordinate the global response in a comprehensive and coordinated manner, based on scientific evidence, political will, and international solidarity. It has become evident that there is a need to consolidate health systems that are people-centered and guided by the principles of justice and solidarity as the basis for guaranteeing health as a right without distinctions of any kind. This is the foundation for strengthening our preparedness for future health threats.
During the Assembly session, the Palestinian delegation stated that the nation is suffering from continued attacks by the Israeli occupying forces and facing a severe economic crisis because of the blockade imposed by the Israeli regime.
El sistema sanitario palestino.
The Palestinian health system is facing the Israeli occupation. In addition, the Palestinian people are facing a severe economic and financial crisis. We are the victim of an economic blockade due to the isolation of some of our camps are subjected to and the separation walls erected by the occupying force. We also face the colonization of our territories. The citizens of Palestine are victims of daily aggressions by the Israeli settlers.
And Venezuelan Health Minister Carlos Alvarado reiterated complaints about the unilateral sanctions imposed by the US government, which generate difficulties to access medicines and health supplies to fight the COVID-19 pandemic.
It is necessary to reiterate our complaints about the crime committed against the Venezuelan people through the unilateral coercive measures with which over 30 million euros have been stolen from our people. All Venezuela's bank accounts in the United States and Europe have been frozen, generating difficulties in accessing food and medicines.
Venezuelan Vice President for Communications, Jorge Rodriguez, revealed further evidence of the plots against the government of Nicolas Maduro, led by opposition lawmaker Juan Guaidó.
That's the criminal triangle that includes the U.S. administration, that includes the Duque government, that includes Juan Guaidó and his henchmen, and also includes notorious Colombian groups and at least one Venezuelan drug trafficker.
More stories coming up after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez this Monday offered an update on the number of coronavirus cases identified in the country.
We must report that in the last 24 hours, 77 new cases have been detected, increasing the number of COVID-19 cases registered in Venezuela to 618 cases. 83% of these cases are imported cases. Out of these 77 new cases, there are 64 imported cases, which represents 83% of the total. Of these 64 imported cases, 47 arrived from Colombia, 44 entered through Táchira, the border post of Táchira State, 1 entered through Amazonas State, 1 entered through Zulia State, 1 entered through Apure State. Out of the 64 imported cases, 4 came from Brazil. They entered through the border post of Bolívar State. 8 came from Ecuador, and they entered through the border post of Táchira State. 5 came from Peru. They returned to Venezuela on the May 8th flight. So these 64 imported cases represent 83% of the 77 total cases we have registered in the last 24 hours.
In Haiti, opposition parties have called for their supporters to resume anti-government demonstrations in the midst of the health emergency sparked by the COVID-19 pandemic. On Monday, the opposition called on the population to resume protests against the administration of President Jovenel Moïse. In response to the call, a small group of protesters took to the streets of the city of Port-au-Prince. They were met with riot police who urged people to comply with basic health prevention measures. The Caribbean nation has so far reported more than 500 COVID-19 cases and 21 fatalities. Social organisations in Bolivia continue to mobilise in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic to demand the resignation of the de facto government led by Janine Áñez. Social organisations held a press conference to demand the resignation of both the de facto president and her close ally, Government Minister Arturo Morillo. They also demanded that general elections be called, as well as calling for the repeal of Decree 4232, which allows the use of genetically modified seeds. During the event, activists also reiterated their commitment to the defence of the country's natural resources. In this regard, they condemned any project leading to the privatisation of the Bolivian oil industry or any other state-owned company. Hundreds of people took to the streets of Santiago de Chile in the midst of the government-imposed quarantine to denounce a lack of food in the capital city. Chilean President Sebastián Piñera decreed a total lockdown in Santiago on May 15th, but failed to provide programs to ensure economic or food aid to residents who, after 3 days of mandatory isolation, took to the streets to demand the necessary food to survive during the pandemic. The protesters stress they are not opposed to the quarantine measures, but are suffering from a lack of state assistance. On Sunday evening, President Piñera announced the distribution of 2.5 million food baskets for the poorest families, a move denounced as completely insufficient, given the almost 802,000 people who registered as unemployed between January and March, according to the latest report from the National Statistics Institute.
Ahora aquí estamos los pobres, de nuevo, como siempre, puros pobres, no has cagado de hambre, cabros. Aquí estamos los valientes, los que siempre luchamos y perseveramos.
Protests continue in Ecuador against the education budget cuts imposed by the government of Lenin Moreno. While observing protection measures against COVID-19, hundreds of students took to the streets to reiterate their rejection of the government's plan to cut education funds. The demonstrators warned of the consequences of the nearly 10% cut to university allocations in the midst of the health crisis. They also denounced that the measure will result in reductions to teaching and administrative staff, as well as in academic enrollment.
Many universities will not be able to start classes, affecting more than 300,000 college students nationwide. And because we will not be able to start classes, in the Central University alone, cutting $11 million means that no more than 800 teachers can be hired. This basically implies that several programs would have to be closed. It also means that over 900 service employees and workers would be laid off.
Fresh resignations of several experts in Peru have called into question the credibility of the Medical Specialists Advisory Committee assembled by the Health Ministry to address the COVID-19 outbreak. The latest resignation was the sixth submitted in recent days. The coordinator of the Transplant Intensive Care Unit at the Guillermo Almenara Hospital, Dr. Rosa Lopez, said that her decision was based on a large number of doctors infected with COVID-19 due to a lack of protection and the false figures offered by the government on the number of cases. Peru is the second hardest hit nation in Latin America, with almost 100,000 cases and over 2,000 fatalities, according to official reports. The United States continues to lead the world in terms of both the number of COVID-19 cases and deaths reported. The United States accounts for about 4.25% of the world's population, but currently has about 29% of confirmed COVID-19 fatalities worldwide at over 91,000. Models used by the White House suggest the death toll could rise to around 147,000 by early August. The state of New York remains the worst hit in the country, with over 193,000 cases and more than 15,000 deaths. However, there are some signs of hope, with the death rate slowing in New York. Meanwhile, Texas, one of the first states to reopen its economy, recorded its highest new caseload yet. And we're taking one last break now, but stay with us for more. Morocco is set to extend its state of emergency declared in the face of the coronavirus pandemic to June 10th. The country has reported almost 7,000 coronavirus cases, the fourth highest number in Africa.
Since our country has chosen from the outset to give priority to the preservation of the health of its citizens and to pull it over all other considerations, and since we have made a lot of progress so far, and in order to preserve this progress, both in terms of epidemic and health, it has been decided to extend the state of health emergency and to extend the lockdown for a period of 3 weeks.
The President of Turkey has announced a national 4-day curfew to contain the spread of COVID-19. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced that the curfew will begin on May 23rd and continue until May 26th as a move to avoid a new surge in cases during the Eid celebrations to mark the end of Ramadan, since Muslims usually visit their friends and families on the occasion. According to the Turkish Ministry of Health, the country has registered over 150,000 coronavirus cases and 4,171 fatalities. Residents in New Delhi have reacted to India's extension of its coronavirus lockdown until the end of May, following the biggest single-day jump in cases in the country. The Indian lockdown, considered the world's largest, affects 1.3 billion people and has been devastating for India's poor, with millions of migrant workers losing their jobs. This is the fourth time the federal government has extended the lockdown, but some restrictions have been lifted. India has reported over 100,000 coronavirus cases.
The situation is such that people have to manage their funds also, so they aren't coming out to buy anything, because what I sell doesn't fall under essential necessities. Right now, people are buying only food because it's uncertain how long this situation will continue. I'm from Uttar Pradesh, and I've been sitting at home for 2 months. I don't have any food left at home, so I had to open my shop today after 2 months. I don't have any food or water, my bank account is empty. I don't have a ration card to my name either, so I decided to open my shop.
The Cuban doctors who arrived in South Africa to help fight COVID-19 have completed their 14-day quarantine in Pretoria. The first group has now arrived in the Northwest Province and is expected to report for duty on Monday. The Cuban Medical Brigade includes experts in the fields of epidemiology, biostatistics and public health. Family doctors will conduct door-to-door surveys and testing and assist local medical workers in health promotion and disease surveillance at the community level. Healthcare technology engineers will also assist in the maintenance, deployment and repair of medical equipment. South Africa is the hardest hit country on the continent, with over 16,000 cases reported, but a much lower death toll of under 300. Meanwhile, over 7,000 patients have recovered from the virus. A team of Chinese medical experts sent to Zimbabwe to support efforts to combat the novel coronavirus held a video conference on Sunday to share their professional experiences with African and Chinese medical personnel deployed across the continent. Representatives of Chinese medical teams in Africa and embassy staff from various African nations consulted with the expert team on the use of masks, patient classification systems, the handling of suspected COVID-19 cases and isolation. The experts also shared their experiences on safeguarding the health and safety of medical personnel and workflow guidelines in fever clinics. The team is made up of experts in infectious diseases and respiratory illnesses, intensive medicine, infection control, traditional Chinese medicine, as well as public health and nursing. Jordanian and Palestinian officials are considering taking simultaneous action, including a suspension of their respective agreements with Israel in response to Israeli plans to annex the occupied territories. Ahmed Deek, director of the Office of the Palestinian Foreign Minister, stated that Jordan and Palestine are working in close coordination on a response to what is considered the theft of Palestinian land. Meanwhile, Najib Kaudiomi, a member of the Palestinian National Council, stressed that all options are open, including a suspension of both the Jordan-Israel Peace Treaty of 1984 and the Declaration of Principle signed by the PLO and Israel in 1993. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas warned in a recent speech that if any Palestinian land is annexed, there will be no reason to uphold the Oslo Accords, and the PLO will be freed from all its commitments to such agreements. Nigerian authorities announced on Sunday that they had impounded a British aircraft for violating coronavirus lockdown restrictions. According to a tweet by Sarika Hadi, Nigeria's Federal Minister of Aviation, UK-based company Flair Aviation was granted approval to fly only for humanitarian operations, but was caught conducting commercial flights. Hadi added that the aircraft crew were interrogated and would face a maximum penalty. Meanwhile, President Muhammadu Buhari met with the COVID-19 Presidential Task Force team on Sunday evening for a weekly briefing and reported that the West African country has confirmed nearly 6,000 cases and a death toll of 182. And in honour of Africa Day later this month, we finish this news brief with a version of the song Mama Africa. The song was originally written and performed by the late Peter Tosh and speaks of the beauty and strength of Africa. This version brings together Peter's son Andrew Tosh, Donald Kinsey and Fully Wolrd, as well as a host of musicians from all over the world. Remember, you can get all the latest news on our website and social media. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching and enjoy the music.